Somewhere in the shadow of Black Mesa Ridge, two rangers are stationed alone, one in a forgotten fire lookout, the other in an old patrol cabin long since buried in red dust and silence. Each begins to notice the land around them is watching, not with eyes but with memory. Strange lights flicker at night, footsteps echo beneath their feet, and voices that should not exist, begin to speak in tones that mimic their own. Drawn deeper by curiosity, duty, and something they can't explain, both rangers soon realize they're not alone. And worse, they may have never been. Set in the haunting isolation of the Navajo Nation, these two atmospheric horror stories explore what happens when ancient protections fail, and something buried decides to breathe again. Welcome to Sunday Scares, where the shadows whisper and nightmares come to life. But did you know that 96% of you watching aren't subscribed? If you love chilling tales that keep you up at night, hit like to feed the darkness, and subscribe if you dare. Now turn off the lights, settle in, and let the horror begin. The first night alone in the tower wasn't supposed to feel so heavy. I'd been working as a fire lookout for nearly 6 years, first in Flagstaff, then out in the San Juans. But nothing quite prepared me for the silence that draped itself over Black Mesa Ridge. It wasn't like other outposts. Most towers buzzed with the faint murmur of wildlife or the ghost of distant highway traffic. Not here. Here, it was as if the world below the tower ceased to exist the moment the sun dipped behind the jagged teeth of the cliffs. The air grew thick, not with heat or dust, but with the sort of stillness that made your thoughts too loud. I'd arrived that afternoon, dropped off by an older ranger named Benny, who didn't say much except to point out the tower's water tank and mutter something about the wind-up top. "It gets strange here after dark," he'd added, but didn't elaborate, just nodded once and disappeared down the switchback road in his dusty green truck. The lookout itself was a rust-colored skeleton with a box cabin perched on top, 27 metal steps twisting up to a creaking wooden platform. Inside, it was bare bones, single cot, radio set, propane stove, and a cabinet of canned goods left behind from last season. The logbook was open to the last entry. May 12th, no fire activity. Saw movement northwest ridge around dusk. Might be a coyote. The handwriting was tight and rushed, the pen ink faded like it had been written in haste. I didn't think much of it until I started my own first entry, the kind every ranger does. Date, weather, wind direction, temperature, visibility. Boring but necessary. That was until the sun went down. It didn't fade the way it did in most places, soft and golden. Here, night dropped like a curtain. 1 minute the desert below stretched far and wide in every direction, its red earth aglow with late light. The next, it was gone, blacked out entirely, like someone had cut the power to the world. Even the stars took longer to appear, as if hesitant to look down on this patch of land. I ate cold chili out of a can and leaned against the window, staring out across the northern ridge, where the ground rippled and twisted with old erosion scars and scattered junipers. That's when I noticed something strange. A light. It flickered, far below, just at the base of the cliff wall. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. At first I thought it might be a reflection, maybe a truck turning around, or a glint of metal, but it didn't move like that. It pulsed. Not fast, like a flashlight, but slow, like a lantern being raised and lowered, out in a place with no road, no trail, and no reason for a person to be. I grabbed the field binoculars and focused in. The glass blurred at first, the failing light playing tricks on the lens, but then it sharpened, and I saw it. A figure, barely more than a silhouette, standing still beside the glowing light. No movement, no sign of a fire or a vehicle. Just a person, alone in the black, facing the tower. I pulled the radio, called out on the open channel. but got nothing but static and the occasional pop of interference. I tried again, checking the frequencies, wondering if maybe I'd tuned it wrong or if the signal was bad. Still nothing. When I looked back, the light was gone. The figure too. Just the wind now, creeping around the corners of the glass with a slow whistle, like a breath caught in the rafters. I told myself it could have been anything. A trick of light. Someone passing through on tribal land. But even as I settled into the cot with a book and my flashlight, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Not just in that paranoid, alone in the woods way. It felt directed, intentional, like whoever was out there had come specifically to be seen. The wind picked up after midnight, rattling the panes and moaning against the joints of the tower. I barely slept. Somewhere around 3 a.m., I thought I heard a knock. Not on the door, but under the floorboards. 3 short raps. Nothing followed. Just silence again, so thick it pressed on my chest. I stayed awake until the sun returned, pale and quiet, spilling light over the red rock canyons like blood on sandstone. As I brewed coffee and stared out at the northern ridge, there was nothing there. No figure, no light. Just the land, ancient and indifferent. I wrote it off in the log as possible stargazer on lower ridge, unconfirmed. But even then, I didn't really believe it. Something had come to Black Mesa last night, and I had the feeling it would be back. I spent most of the second day trying to convince myself that nothing had really happened the night before, that the figure I thought I'd seen on the ridge was nothing more than the heat leaving my eyes, the afterimage of a long day in the sun combined with too much canned food and not enough rest. I even joked aloud to myself as I ran checks on the tower's structure and cables, saying things like, better lay off the chili before bed, and no more ghost stories before lights out. But beneath the sarcasm was an unease I couldn't shake, a knot just below my ribs that seemed to tighten every time I looked out toward that northern ridge where the light had appeared. The radio continued to be spotty, and every attempt I made to reach out to base was met with silence or strange feedback, like wind passing through copper tubing. I even climbed down to the lower platform and tried from the edge of the bluff, thinking maybe the tower itself was interfering. Nothing. Dead air. Static. And once, a strange warbling tone that made the hair rise on my arms. The logbook hadn't been updated in nearly 2 weeks before my arrival. I flipped back through entries looking for anything. Strange weather, animal activity, unusual sightings. But it was all routine. Wind speeds, temperatures, clear skies, no smoke. Except for one note scrawled hastily on a loose scrap, tucked between pages. It wasn't even signed. Just a piece of torn map paper with the words, "Don't answer if it calls from below." I didn't know what it meant, and maybe I didn't want to. By sunset, the tower had begun to creak more than usual, the metal struts groaning as the cooling air settled into the bones of the mesa. It was the kind of sound you usually learn to ignore, but tonight it felt different, rhythmic almost, like footsteps pacing just outside on the catwalk. I checked twice. Nothing but dry wind and the sweeping expanse of desert shadows stretching toward the horizon. As darkness fell, I returned to my post by the north-facing window, not out of duty, but because I couldn't help it. I felt drawn to that direction now, like whatever had stood there the night before had left something behind, an imprint, a gravity. I drank weak coffee and waited, watching as the last light fled from the land like it was afraid of what came next. Around 9:30 p.m., just after I'd turned off the cabin light to preserve night vision, I saw it again. A flicker at first, then steady. Same place, same ridge, the same strange glow that pulsed like breath. I didn't reach for the binoculars this time. I didn't need to. I could see the shape beside it more clearly now. Tall, still, human in outline but wrong in proportion. Its shoulders too wide, its stance too rigid. like a puppet on wires. It didn't move, not even when the wind gusted hard enough to make the tower sway. It just stood there, facing me, bathed in the orange pulse of that unnatural light. I reached for the radio again, more out of instinct than hope. "Look out to base," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Possible unauthorized person on ridge, requesting confirmation of patrols in area." Static. Then a brief burst of sound, not voice, but something else. A soft clicking, then a whisper, faint and stretched like it had traveled too far. I froze. "Repeat, Black Mesa lookout requesting." And that's when it came again. Clearer this time. A voice. My voice. "Repeat, Black Mesa lookout." Trailing off into the dark. I slammed the radio down, heart pounding, the realization sinking in like ice. It had mimicked me. Not a recording, a response. The words had matched mine exactly, but the tone was just slightly off, like hearing your echo return a beat too slow, with too much breath behind it. The light below flared once, blindingly bright, then vanished. The figure with it, gone, as if they had never been. I sat in the silence for what felt like hours, gripping the desk edge so hard my fingers ached. The wind had died, but the tower still creaked softly, shifting in the night like something breathing just below the wood. I turned in for the night around midnight, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the ridge, the light, that thing wearing the shape of a man. At some point, I must have drifted off, because I woke just before dawn to a sound I couldn't place at first. Not the wind, not the groan of the tower. It was music, faint, distorted, like a broken cassette played through water. I stumbled to the window and looked out, but saw nothing in the dark. Still, the music continued, low and warbling, a woman's voice maybe, singing in a language I didn't know. I tracked the sound, pacing the cabin, pressing my ear to the floor, to the walls. When I leaned close to the west vent near the storage cabinet and heard it loudest, not coming from outside, but from inside the structure, from beneath the floorboards. I crouched down, pressed my ear to the wood, and there it was, the same music, now accompanied by a soft tapping sound, as if someone were knocking gently from within the supports of the tower. I backed away slowly and sat down on the cot, unsure what to do. Rational thought tried to take hold, maybe wind through a broken panel, or a bird nest vibrating against the walls. But somewhere deeper inside, I already knew that explanation didn't hold. I was alone up here, alone except for whatever had come back last night, and maybe never left. I marked the logbook with a simple line: unusual audio disturbance beneath tower. Investigate in daylight. But I wasn't sure I would. Something about this place, about Black Mesa, had changed since I arrived. Or maybe it had always been like this, waiting for someone to stay too long, to look too hard, to listen when it called. I didn't plan to go near the vent again, not tonight. I turned on every light in the cabin and sat by the window, facing the north ridge, watching the horizon for even the smallest flicker of light. The third day began like the last, with the sun rising pale and reluctant over Black Mesa Ridge, casting long, blood-colored shadows across the sandstone spines that jutted from the desert like broken ribs. I hadn't slept, not really, only drifted in and out of a shallow, uneasy half-consciousness, haunted by sounds I couldn't fully explain. The music had stopped shortly before dawn, but not the knocking. That came in irregular bursts throughout the night, always from beneath the floor, sometimes soft, sometimes insistent, like a coded message from something that didn't understand how to be human. I hadn't dared open the trapdoor that led down beneath the cabin into the maintenance level. A steel hatch set flush with the floor and bolted shut with a rusted latch that looked like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I kept telling myself that the sounds had to be wind interacting with old pipes or maybe animals nesting in the hollow beams, but deep down I knew better. The sounds were too deliberate, too aware. They weren't random. They waited until I was still. They responded when I moved. Something was mimicking me, learning my patterns, testing the silence like it was tracing the shape of my thoughts. I tried to fill the day with tasks, climbing the tower's outer supports to check the wiring, cleaning the observation windows, logging cloud cover and wind speeds. But even the act of writing felt hollow now. Every time I glanced at the open logbook, I was reminded of that note tucked inside. Don't answer if it calls from below. I hadn't answered, not directly, but I'd listened, and I was beginning to wonder if that had been enough. By early afternoon, the wind picked up, blowing hot and dry across the ridge. Dust devils spun lazily in the valley below, and I watched them from the catwalk through a pair of sun-faded binoculars. There were no hikers, no patrols, no signs of movement on the trail that cut through the scrub brush near the northern slope. Just shimmering heat and rust-colored rock. But the air didn't feel natural. It carried something else with it. A vibration. A pressure that built behind the eyes like a migraine warning. I couldn't shake the sensation that the landscape itself was holding its breath. Around 3 p.m., I heard the knock again, this time in daylight. 3 distinct raps from directly below the trapdoor, louder than before, not echoing up through metal or pipe, but sharp against the wood, as if a hand, flesh and bone, had struck it. I stood frozen for nearly a minute, waiting to hear it again, waiting for some sign that it had been a fluke. Nothing. Just the wind brushing across the catwalk and the faint metallic creak of the tower adjusting to its weight. I considered opening the hatch. I even knelt beside it and ran my hand across the warm metal surface, feeling for movement, listening for breath. It was quiet now. I was about to unlatch it when I noticed something odd, a faint discoloration around the rim of the hatch, as though the metal had been warped or heated from below. A pattern, almost like fingerprints, pressed outward. I pulled my hand back quickly and stood, heart hammering. I wasn't going down there, not alone, not now. That night, I kept every light in the cabin on and turned the cot to face the northern windows. I didn't want to sleep, but fatigue was catching up to me, dragging down my limbs like they were filled with sand. I drifted sometime after midnight, flashlight in hand, logbook open in my lap, pen still uncapped. I woke to darkness, complete, every light out. My watch said 3:17 a.m. The power had failed. I stumbled for the emergency lamp and flicked it on, its dim red glow barely enough to push back the shadows that clung to the corners of the cabin like wet sheets. The radio crackled to life just then, bursting with sudden static. I jumped, dropping the lamp, but caught it before it shattered. Then a voice, buried deep in the noise. "Come down. Come see." A whisper, a suggestion, not a command. I stepped back from the desk slowly, as if not to startle something. My eyes flicked to the trapdoor. The bolts were undone. I hadn't touched them. I would have heard. I would have known. But there it was, open by an inch. A black seam in the floor where there should have been nothing. The wind outside had stopped entirely, and with it, the tower's usual creaking. It was dead still, like the world had paused. I knelt slowly, inching toward the hatch, not to open it, just to look, just to be sure. My breath fogged in the cold that now seeped through the floor, an impossible chill that hadn't been there minutes ago. I tilted my head to the side, aligning my ear to the crack, and listened. Nothing at first. Then, slowly, I heard a sound I still can't describe without shivering. It wasn't music. It wasn't speech. It was like someone imitating the sounds of life, the rhythm of footsteps, the pacing of breath, the creak of a chair. All mashed together and repeated, warped slightly with each echo, like a bad recording growing worse the more it was played. And then a voice, Not mine this time, but someone else's. Older. Tired. They won't let me leave, not until someone takes my place. I scrambled back, kicked the hatch shut with my heel, and threw both bolts hard enough to sting my hands. I didn't go back to sleep. I waited out the rest of the night with my back against the far wall, the red emergency lamp held tight in both hands, casting warped shadows across the floor. When the sun finally came, the power flicked back on as if nothing had happened. The lights blinked to life. The radio fell silent. I opened the logbook and wrote my first entry in 2 days. Do not go below. Do not respond. Something down there is pretending to be people. I underlined it 3 times. My coffee tasted like copper that morning, and I dumped it out. I was beginning to understand why Benny hadn't said much when he dropped me off. Some things you can't explain until someone sees them for themselves. Some things won't believe you until they've heard it, until they've listened too long. I didn't know what was waiting beneath the floor of the lookout, or how long it had been there. But I was starting to wonder whether this place, this tower, was meant to keep watch over the land, or to keep whatever was under it from getting out. Empty. The cot was cold, the food half-eaten, the logbook closed. The radio crackled softly with static, but no one responded. On the outside of the glass, a note flapped in the wind, barely legible now, the ink smeared from heat and dew. And just beyond the tower's base, near the edge of the ridge trail, a faint orange light pulsed steady in the early dawn, like a lantern being held by a man who never left and never truly arrived. First entry, April 10th. I was assigned to the Black Mesa Patrol cabin for a 2-week solo rotation starting April 10th, part of a seasonal transition effort the department was doing to reintroduce a human presence at several remote sites that had fallen out of use over the years. I'm not sure what that really means, except that the place is isolated as hell, and I drew the short straw. According to the ranger who dropped me off, an older Navajo man named Arlen, the cabin hadn't had anyone stay in it since the late 90s, except for a structural inspection 2 years ago. No fire damage, no vandalism, just weathering, and some minor subsidence near the back foundation. He didn't say much during the drive, but I caught him glancing at the rearview mirror more than once on the long stretch of cracked road leading into the ridge basin. When we arrived, he handed me the key, a stack of paper logs from the 1980s, and a 6-pack of bottled water with a dry joke about not trusting the well after dark. I smiled, but he didn't. The cabin sits nestled in a shallow hollow ringed by ancient pinions and sandstone columns that look like teeth when the sun hits them at an angle. The building itself is a boxy, single-room structure with a covered porch, a rusted metal roof, and a root cellar hatch at the back that Arlen told me to avoid unless I hear scratching. Again, a joke maybe. The interior's a mix of pine and mildew with dust hanging thick in the beams. There's a bunk, a cast iron stove, and a small desk with a kerosene lamp, which I lit after sunset. There's no electricity here, no signal either, and the radio only works in bursts if I step 50 feet uphill and hold the antenna at just the right angle. My plan is to spend most of the time surveying erosion around the dry creek bed nearby and updating the wildlife logs from the 90s, which was still sitting in the desk drawer, yellowed and brittle. I brought a digital recorder, a field notebook, and a few printed maps that show older trail systems, some of which I think have long since disappeared. My first night was uneventful, mostly unpacking and trying to make the place feel like something other than a museum of forgotten things. I found a few artifacts in the cabinet: old matches, a weather-beaten Navajo basket, and a tin box containing a rusted harmonica and 2 black and white photographs of previous rangers. One photo showed a man standing in front of the cabin in the early 60s, smiling stiffly. The second was nearly identical. Same pose, same location, but the man in it wasn't smiling. His face was turned slightly, as if looking over his shoulder towards something in the trees behind him. That photo made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't explain, so I left it face down on the desk. Around midnight, I heard something shift below me. Faint, but deliberate, like a footstep against gravel beneath the floorboards. The cabin's built on a stone footing, maybe 3 feet of crawl space below, and I figured it could have been a coyote or some other animal seeking warmth. Still, it put me on edge. I lit the second lamp and made a slow pass around the interior, checking corners, the fireplace, the windows. Nothing. No eyes in the dark. No movement outside. Just that still, pressed silence that this part of the desert wears like a skin. I couldn't shake the feeling that the cabin didn't like being used again. Not in an animated haunted house kind of way, just reluctant, like an old man woken too early. The kind of silence where every sound feels like an intrusion. Before bed, I checked the cellar door. It was sealed tight with an iron hasp and padlock, which I hadn't noticed before. The key ring Arlen gave me has a second key that I hadn't used yet, and I had the sudden, irrational urge to open it, just to see what was below. But I didn't. Instead, I pressed my palm against the door and listened. Nothing. No scratching, no movement. Only the cold of the metal and the strange sense that something below was listening back. I'll sleep with the lamp on tonight. Second entry, April 11th. Something is wrong with the earth beneath this place. I didn't notice it right away, but now that I've spent a full day on the ridge, I can feel it underfoot. Like the ground is stretched tight in some places and hollow in others, the way an old drum skin thins with age. I spent the morning following the old foot trail that runs south from the porch, past a cluster of dead junipers, and down toward the arroyo. The stream bed's long dry, just a slash of pale stone and windblown sand now, but the way it cuts through the land doesn't look natural anymore. It veers at odd angles, like something burrowed through it, and the desert only later tried to make sense of the disruption. My GPS didn't register any major shifts in elevation, but my feet told a different story. Sudden dips where the land slouched unexpectedly. Long stretches of soil that felt unstable beneath my boots, as if something once breathed under it and collapsed its lungs in sleep. The wildlife here is unusually sparse, even for high desert terrain. No deer tracks, no scat, no signs of coyote or fox. I spotted a vulture circling high over the western butte, but it didn't descend, and I never saw what it was tracking. The wind picked up around midday, dry and high, and as I crouched near a sun-bleached mesquite to take notes, I swear I heard it again, singing. Very faint, but deliberate. A voice. Not melodic in the usual sense, but rhythmic. Syllables rising and falling with the wind in a cadence that mimicked breath. It sounded like someone singing through cupped hands, the way children do, to make their voices sound farther away. I turned in a full circle, notebook forgotten, but the sound vanished before I could track it. It didn't echo. It didn't trail off. It just stopped. That's when I noticed the pile of rocks, maybe 20 yards from the edge of the arroyo. Not natural debris either. It had the unmistakable shape of an old cairn, carefully balanced, 5 stones wide and about 2 feet tall. Someone had built it long ago by the look of it, and time had weathered its edges smooth. I approached cautiously, sensing the reverence that clung to the thing. There was something wedged beneath it, fabric maybe or hide. I bent down and pulled gently, and it came free in my hands. A bundle of woven cord wrapped around what looked like a fragment of antler, carved with shallow spiral grooves. I couldn't read the markings, but they made me uneasy in a way I didn't want to think about. I reburied it. Not just placed it back. Buried it, scooping sand over the base and packing the stones tighter. The wind died as I did, dead calm. Not a single sound around me. It felt like the land had been watching, holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd do. I made it back to the cabin by early evening, the sunlight fading behind the red cliffs in streaks of pink and orange that felt more like bruises than beauty. The stillness returned the moment I crossed the porch, thicker now, like the very air had weight. I brought the artifact inside, even though I told myself not to. I know that was a mistake. I laid it on the desk and stared at it, unsure what to feel. Guilt, curiosity, that silent pressure behind my eyes that reminded me of childhood nights when I knew something was in the hallway, just out of view. The antler still smelled faintly of smoke, old, buried smoke, the kind that seeps into bone and doesn't let go. I wrapped it in cloth and stashed it in the desk drawer. I didn't hear anything at first, not until just after midnight. It began as a low creaking, like the sound of an old beam settling under weight, only it came from beneath the cabin. Then another. Then a long, drawn-out groan. Not wood this time, but something heavier. Stone, maybe. Something large shifting slowly in a confined space. I sat up in bed, not daring to move. The lamp flickered once, then again, then went out. No wind, no storm, just the sudden failure of light. I fumbled for the matches, found one, and lit the wick again. The silence returned, but it wasn't passive. It pressed against the walls now. I could feel it breathing, slow and deep, from below the floor. I don't mean that figuratively. The floorboards actually rose and fell. Barely, but enough to feel. A pulse, a sigh. I grabbed the flashlight and crouched beside the hatch, still sealed, still locked. I pressed my ear to the metal and froze. There was something down there, moving gently, circling maybe. Something that dragged across stone like fingers raking soil. It stopped when I leaned closer, as though it sensed proximity. Then I heard the whisper. My name. Not shouted, not called. Whispered. From beneath the hatch, in a voice I didn't recognize but somehow knew. A voice not shaped for language trying to replicate it. I didn't answer. First. Backed away slowly and wrote in my notebook instead, as quietly as possible. I don't think it likes the sound of ink. The scratching of the pen seems to disrupt it, irritate it. I'll keep writing tonight, if only to keep it still. I've also moved the artifact to the back of the root cellar door. I didn't open it, just wedged the wrapped antler against the base. Something changed when I did. The pressure lifted slightly, like a door had closed somewhere below. I don't know what this thing is or what it wants, but I have a feeling it was left here for a reason. Buried, hidden, marked with symbols meant to warn. And I, stupid, curious, isolated, dug it up. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I've marked the cairn on my map and noted the date. April 11th. If anything happens to me, that's where it started. That's the wound in the land. That's the mouth. Third entry, April 12th. I didn't sleep last night, and I don't think I will again as long as I stay here. Every time I close my eyes, I heard it. Not the scratching anymore. Not the breath or the weight shifting beneath the floor, but the voice. Not speaking now, praying. Or at least that's what it sounded like. A soft, steady rhythm of syllables strung together in some dead dialect. Not urgent, but purposeful, like a chant that's been repeated for centuries beneath stone. The words didn't sound human. Not just foreign, but wrong. In the way they bent in my ear, curling and repeating like they were circling a hole in my mind. I didn't realize until almost dawn that my hand had been writing while I listened, just scribbling in the field journal, not words, not English, just looping symbols that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than thought. I tore out the pages and burned them in the stove before the sun rose fully, but the ash didn't crumble right. It stayed in dense flakes, curling upward in the heat like they didn't want to die. The air in the cabin is changing. It smells like wet granite and dried blood now, even with the windows open. Something beneath the cabin is close, and I think it's beginning to understand that I hear it, that I see it in the edges of my thoughts, in the flickers behind reflections. I caught my own face blinking at me in the window this morning while I was still staring. That's not a metaphor. I wasn't blinking. It was off rhythm, like a delay in a bad video call, but slower. And then it smiled, only for a second. That's when I left the cabin. I hiked north toward the edge of the ridge, following a barely there game trail that didn't show on the modern maps, but was sketched faintly on the 1982 topographical one left in the drawer. The trail curved around the lip of the hollow and cut through a grove of gnarled pinyons I hadn't noticed before. Tall, skeletal things that leaned in odd directions like they were listening. Beyond them was a stone arch, half collapsed, with petroglyphs carved into the underside. The symbols weren't like anything I've seen in Navajo, Hopi, or Pueblo artwork. These weren't meant to be read. They were meant to bind. I could feel it the moment I stepped beneath the arch, a pressure like crossing through water that had teeth. On the far side of the arch, the ground sloped downward into a crater-like depression ringed by vertical slabs of sandstone. In the center was a large, flat stone split down the middle with age. It had the same spiral carvings as the antler I'd unearthed, only more complex, more involved, like a conversation that had gone on for a very long time and was still unfinished. I didn't approach it. I stood at the edge and took notes, my hands shaking so badly the pen kept skipping. The soil around the crater was blackened, like from an old fire, but no vegetation had grown back, not even weeds. I called out once, just to break the silence. Not loud, just a hello. It echoed too well, bounced back at me from the stones in a tone that didn't match my voice. Lower, fuller, curious. I left immediately. When I returned to the cabin, I found the root cellar door wide open, the padlock untouched, still locked and hanging from the hasp. But the door itself was ajar, just enough to see the stairs leading down into darkness. I didn't go in. I couldn't. The air coming out of it was wrong, not just cold, hungry. I closed it gently and pushed the cot back over it, this time adding my pack and a heavy tin chest I found in the back closet filled with old ranger uniforms. And then I did the one thing I told myself I wouldn't do. I listened again. I sat beside the hatch in the dim lamplight and placed my hand on the wood floor. I didn't speak. I just waited. At first, there was nothing, and I began to think maybe it had gone quiet. Maybe I'd buried the antler just in time. But then the whisper returned. Not from below now, but from behind the walls. And it wasn't a voice. It was breathing. All around me, inside the wood, inside the cabin itself. As if the structure had inhaled something while empty for all those decades, and now it was exhaling it slowly into me. I pressed my back to the wall and listened. The breathing changed. It mimicked mine, matched it, slowed it, guided it, until I was no longer sure whose lungs were pulling air. Then, from beneath the floor, a voice spoke one word, one single, awful word. My name. Not shouted, not whispered, said, clearly, calmly, as though whoever, or whatever, it belonged to had always known me, had been waiting to say it aloud. I wrote it down in the log just to prove to myself it happened. But even as I did, I noticed the page had already been turned. The date was tomorrow, April 13th, and there was already handwriting on it. Mine. I read it once, then I tore it out and burned it too. I won't write it again. I'm not sure if I wrote it in my sleep or if something else did. Either way, it described the cairn, the artifact, the arch, all of it in exact detail. Even things I hadn't yet seen, things I saw today. I'm no longer sure the journal is tracking time the same way I am. I flipped to the last page and found it filled, all of it, in my handwriting. Pages I never touched, words I don't remember, warnings, pleas, repetitions. The phrase, "You are not the first, but you are the last," appears 9 times, always at the end of a paragraph. I've stopped reading. I'll use fresh paper from here on out. I buried the artifact again. Not at the can. I climbed to the top of the arch and dropped it into a narrow fissure near the edge, then packed it with stone and marked it with a blank white flag, something clean, something that doesn't carry old memory. It didn't stop anything. If anything, the breathing has grown louder. It doesn't want the artifact. That was just a key. It wants what the cabin offers, a conduit, a host. I think this place was never meant for safety. It was meant as a capstone, a prison, a last measure. And now that it's been disturbed, it's trying to remember the shape of the human mind. I think it's using mine to do it. I haven't spoken aloud in hours. I'm afraid of what voice will answer if I do. The wind has changed. It no longer moves the trees. It's circling the cabin instead, humming against the boards in long, slow passes, like it's searching for a crack. I don't think I can stay another night, but I'm not sure if I leave, it will let me take my body with me. Final entry, April 13th. This will be my last entry. Not because I'm out of pages, but because I'm no longer sure who's writing them anymore. I woke this morning to find the fire long dead, the lamp cold, and the sky outside a shade of grey I've never seen over the desert. It wasn't cloud cover. It was like the light itself had stopped working correctly, like the sun was back there somewhere, but couldn't push through. There were no shadows, just a diffuse, sickly brightness that made everything look washed and brittle. I'd meant to leave today. That had been the plan since last night, when the wind stopped moving around the cabin and began funneling beneath it instead, like a drain had opened in the hollow. I'd packed too. Gear by the door, water, field journal, a flare in case I needed to signal Arlen or whoever might be within range. But when I stepped onto the porch this morning, everything felt wrong. The air had weight again, like before a storm, but heavier. Not pressure from above, but a pulling from beneath, like the land wanted me to stay. Or like it wanted something to come up. I made it 30 steps toward the trail before I heard the voice, not behind me, in me. My own voice whispering not in my ears, but somewhere behind the eyes, like an echo trapped between skull and skin. It said one thing: don't leave it open. I froze. I hadn't left the root cellar open. I'd checked it twice, but the voice wasn't talking about a door. It was talking about the cabin itself, the site, the ridge. Whatever had been sealed beneath Black Mesa had been placed there for a reason, and I, in my dumb, well-meaning isolation, had peeled that seal back without knowing it. The can, the antler, the arch, all locks, all keys. I should have known from the moment I stepped under that fallen arch that something had changed. I felt it. That slow shifting in the soil, like a breath turning over in its sleep. Something beneath this cabin isn't alive in the way we are, but it is aware, and I believe it's waking. I went back inside and tried to call out again. Radio, nothing. Phone, dead. GPS, scrambled. I checked the journal. Mine, the clean one I started using after I found my handwriting filling pages I didn't remember writing. But it had changed again. Half the entries were now in a different script. Jagged, symmetrical, mirrored glyphs that looked like something burnt into stone by heat and pressure. And the newest entry, written in my own hand, was dated tomorrow, April 14th. It said simply, "It knows your name now." I didn't write that. I don't think I did, unless I'm doing things in my sleep. Unless it's not sleep anymore. I haven't slept since the first night, not really. I lay down, yes. I close my eyes. But each time I do, I dream things I'm not sure belong to me. Vast underground hollows with skyless ceilings, red roots that pulse like veins, voices chanting from mouths sealed shut with ash. In one of them, I saw myself standing at the center of the arch, arms outstretched, eyes black and glowing from within, speaking a language I didn't understand but which poured out of me effortlessly. I saw figures behind me, not human, not anymore, and they watched not with faces but with intent. I think the dreams aren't mine. I think they belong to it, or to those who came before me. I don't think I'm the first one to wake this thing. I think the cabin gets used every few decades when the bindings begin to thin, when the land starts to forget. And someone alone, someone curious, always hears it, always listens. Maybe it's always been this way. Maybe that's why the patrols stopped coming here. Maybe Arlen knew, and dropping me off was part of the ritual. If so, he's long gone now. I don't blame him. I wouldn't come back either. The wind has picked up again. Not outside, under the floorboards, and it's carrying sound now. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, circling the edge of the cellar, scuffing against stone. I moved the cot again, and the lock is still in place. But I don't think that matters anymore. I think locks are for people, not for what's down there. I opened the hatch. I don't remember doing it. I just looked up from the page, and it was open. Not wide, just a crack, but enough to see the black descending stairs and the faint red glow from below, like coals left too long under sand. I didn't go down, but I looked, for too long. And something looked back. Not a face, not a body, just a shape of thought, hovering below the first step, like a shadow cast by something that doesn't exist in this world, the way we understand it. It pulsed when I looked at it, and in that moment, I felt it. Not saw, felt, all of it. Its age, its hunger, its patience. It doesn't want to kill, it doesn't need to. It waits. It feeds on memory, on identity. It wears your voice like clothing and walks back into the world while you remain beneath it, dreaming its dreams until there's nothing left of you to remember. I understand now what the journal meant when it said, "You are the last." This cabin isn't just a prison. It's a vessel, a relay, a station built to house the threshold. And someone must always watch it. Someone must always hear the breathing, see the light, feel the thoughts at the edge of sleep. And when they are done, when they are too hollow to hold themselves, the next comes. I thought about burning it, the whole cabin. There's enough dry timber, enough accelerant, and I could strike a flame in under 5 minutes, but something stops me. Not fear, not pity, something else. A suggestion inside my own skull. Fire is a door too. That phrase keeps repeating in my head, looping like a cracked record. Fire is a door. Fire is a door. I don't know what that means. But I know now why the artifact was left behind. It wasn't just a key. It was bait. A whisper in the soil that says, "Come see." And I did. I listened. I saw. I remembered. I became. I've placed a copy of this journal inside the harmonica box with the photos. I've buried it beneath the stone arch, deep under the red sand. If you find it, if you read this, leave. Do not stay. Do not enter the cabin. Do not open the hatch. Do not speak aloud. The land can forget. But it never forgives. It buries what it fears, and you will be part of that fear if you let it in. The sky has gone black, though it's only late afternoon. The wind is howling beneath me now, pulling at the boards, rattling the jars on the shelf. I am the breath. I am the whisper. I am the watch. And soon, I will not be.